Yes, people, hope everyone is doing good. Today, we're going to have a discussion, a real deep discussion on the number 10. What is the number 10? What is the number 10 to Leeds United? Who should play there and why? So I want to start off by saying this. There's a difference, a big difference, in the traditional number 10, in my opinion, and the requirements of a Daniel Farke number 10. And this is probably the biggest thing in all of this. The number 10 that people are talking about, the small, diminutive, highly technical, can play balls through the lines, sits between the defenders, the midfielders and the attackers, just links play up, the playmaker. That player in the modern game, in that role, doesn't really exist as much as it used to. In fact, in most systems, that isn't required. The game is completely different to what it used to be. It's very, very system-based, which means that guy's role has a lot more different aspects to it than it used to. Most of them come off the ball. Pressing, off the ball movement, shape. You know, the uprise of creativity in wingers is completely different to what it used to be traditionally. You know, inside forwards are now a thing. You know, literally playing with 6 players in the attacking third make it more compact. Eights like Tanaka and Rockwell are kind of 10s in certain aspects. So the 10 has to adapt. And the system that you play, and again, look, fullbacks as well become attackers. So the game is completely different to what it used to be. So that traditional 10 that I described, that profile, you're speaking of, you know, the Kakas, for example, that really defined, even Pablo Hernandez at Leeds United in certain aspects. That real technical defined player is very different to what it is now. It's completely different in every system, right? Because there's a lot more emphasis on the way to attack. It's not really through one player anymore. It's through the way you attack. It's through the movement. Whereas back then, they were the man. They were the player. They were the one. Very different now. A lot more creativity comes out wide now or in transition. So it's very different. So the biggest contrast for me in that sense is the requirements of a Farke 10 and the traditional 10. And I think everyone's right when they mention, for example, we'll talk about Gnonto. The traditional 10, yeah, you can see a lot of really good traits. But the requirement of a 10 in the Farke system is slightly different. It's also different to Aronson as well, just to clarify. You know, and that's the biggest contrast for me. People are discussing what traditional 10 is, the idea of that, what that is, but that's completely different to what the manager requires. However, there are nuances to this as well. Of course, as well, I have to add, with the opposition as well, the way in which low blocks and mid blocks are now really designated, compact things that are worked on week after week after week. There isn't space in that traditional space. So you have to be a different player. You have to adapt. And coming from a recruitment perspective, because that's obviously where I work in, I'm going to try delve into it. Now, there's 2 main things in recruitment from my personal perspective, and every club's different, but I think fundamentally it's quite similar. When you're looking for a player, right, you're watching a player, you get given a report, you get given players, a list of players. There's 2 things they have to meet. And every time you watch that player, there is 2 things that are constantly in your mind. The first one is, can they work in the league? Right? Do they have the physical capacity, the mentality, the technical ability to work in this league? Right? That's always going through your brain. The second one, and probably the most important, is, are they right for the manager? Are they what the manager wants? Those are the 2 main things. Now, you know what the manager wants. Coming as a scout or working in recruitment, you know what the manager wants because you have a list or a sheet with the KPIs of the manager in every single position, which define the exact profile of player that the manager is looking for. And this is your job to identify that in everything you do and find a player that fits that, right? You know, so the idea that the 10 is one thing isn't true. You could use this for any situation and any fullback, you know, any player like fullback, for example. Junior Firpo. If I'm recruiting for, and we'll use an example here. If I'm recruiting for a team in Spain, right, mid-table Spain, pushing for Europe, we play a back 3. I need an attacking fullback. Defensive numbers don't really matter. I'm looking for an attacking fullback who can play wing back, right? That's what I'm looking for. That's the profile. They need to be good in the final third. Goals and assists, attack the box, create combination, play in the final third, invert. I'm looking for that. Firpo, in all the metrics, in everything I watch, will be high up on that list. Probably top 10. Say we've got a budget, right? We'll be up there. If I'm looking for a solid defensive fullback in a back four, and I use Firpo because he's played both. He's played in a back four and a back five. Is Firpo going to be in that with the defensive side? He isn't, is he? He just isn't. Because there is profiles that best suit the manager than this player. Likewise, if I'm looking for a physical box-to-box fullback, you know, if you like, in the Premier League, is Firpo up there? Probably not. Not as low down as the defensive fullback, but he's not the top, is he? There's a lot better profiles to suit that. A Robinson, for example. So this is the key thing, and this is exactly the same in the 10. The 10 isn't one thing anymore. It's a completely different thing depending on the profile. Some 10s in some systems might be big physical players that are there purely, really for transitions or to hold the ball up, ball into feet, turn, drive, kind of like a Rutter was. You know, maybe a bit of Gibbs White about them as well. Get the ball, can drive with it, and attack the box. Other 10s play alongside the striker. You know, I'm looking at Steve Hamern at Daniel Farke. Was very good at playing alongside Timo Pukki. Was good in the box, was good in the air. Could drop into midfield because he was good defensively as well. And then you've got, obviously, other profiles like the small diminutive players in other systems that work. The pure creators who can play in midfield, like the Ozils. So you need to find the right player for your system. It's the same thing in every position. So I think the biggest contrast that people are making is the 10 as one thing. I see, oh, look, he can play the 10 because look at him on the half turn. Look how he can drive. Look how he can take guys on, his balls through. That is excellent. That is excellent. But when you're working systematically, it relies on other pieces. My issue personally with Gnonto in the 10 and why he's not the perfect fit from a recruitment perspective, if I'm recruiting and we're looking for a player in the 10 in a Farke system, Gnonto isn't there. He's a winger. He'll be high in the wing list. He's not going to be there in the 10 simply because he doesn't match the KPIs of the key performance indicators, those list of needs for a Daniel Farke number 10, based on every 10 he's had in the past, who predominantly have been taller players, who are less kind of diminutive, quick, but they're effective in high areas. They can defend, they can press, they can play midfield, and they can attack the box predominantly, and they're decent on the ball. And this is where that's where football is, for good or bad. It's very, very systematic now. You know, I'm not going to say where I work or anything, but I'll change the example. If I'm, say, so I'm in the Bundesliga 2, right? I work for a team in Bundesliga. I don't, just imagine. I work for a team in the Bundesliga 2. And imagine, right? The Bundesliga 2 is a lot more physical than the Bundesliga. A lot more physical. It isn't, but just imagine it is. And there's a player in the Bundesliga who's a young player, very highly rated, but he wouldn't be able to live up to the physical demands of the league. You won't pick him. Even though he's very talented, you would go for someone who suits the demands of the league, who is more physical. That's what football is right now, and it's the same for position. It could be a fantastic attacking fullback, but in the league you're in the position you're going to be in the league, you need a very defensive, solid fullback. You know? It's the same in the 10. You need a player who suits that profile. A player who can not only attack, but one who is very good off the ball. Because you know, if he isn't, you could get exposed in midfield. You need someone as a possession team who's going to win the ball high up, who's going to pressure opponents, whose understanding of the press makes opponents go down certain ways, certain angles. And that's what Aronson is really good at. Now, Aronson isn't the perfect profile either, I'd argue. Because he doesn't have that consistency in the final third. He rushes decisions. His decisions aren't always right. He does lose the ball too easily at times. Doesn't attack the box great. So the solution isn't necessarily Aronson or Gnonto. The solution was find the profile that the manager wants. And those are the key things. There's a big difference between position, the player's position, and the role within that position, how that role fits the system based on what the manager wants, and how every other player around the player in that role fits the system. Because the system is one thing. You have individual roles which make the system. Now, our problem with Leeds at the moment, currently, is we don't look at the Norwich team. The way it worked so well. Stipperman is probably the prime example because he was the main one at the start. He worked so well for Daniel Farke because as the 10, what he was very good at, an aspect of his game that is underrated, was his aerial ability. So, out of the ball, he could drop deeper and win the ball in the air. And then when they attacked, he could get a lot higher, almost alongside Pukki a lot of the time. But he could also run the channels. He could create combination play out wide. Now, what helped was their profile of striker, Timo Pukki, was very, very good in terms of movement. Very good. Quicker than ours. Quicker than our options. And could finish. We don't have that luxury. We have an excellent finisher in Joel Perot. But he's not as mobile in any way as Pukki is. Not even close. Right? We know that. An excellent finisher, but not as mobile. Which means you need more mobility centrally in situations where we're attacking. Because if we're playing out wide and we're building up out wide, like Gnonto did, excellent. But then what's in the box? It's so hard to find players. And that's what I mean. Our biggest threats in the box are our fullbacks. And they're not always going to be up. They're not always going to be up there. They'll be up there sometimes, but not always. So because we don't have that mobile box number 9 that's fit or available, we rely on our 10 to be that person. Does that make sense? But we can't. Because they're doing other things out wide, they're creating things. So that's what I mean about the system. If you have one player that doesn't suit it, another player has to kind of fill in. Right? Which means it's taken away from their role. Which isn't ideal. And because we don't have that player in the box, we kind of need our 10 to do that. Or we need our fullbacks to attack each and every time to get in the box. So that was a big difference in his Norwich team. You know, when Stipperman did create combinations out wide, they had Pukki in the box. So they knew they put any ball in and around the box, he'd sniff it out. That's the biggest difference. And I think that's the contrast we need to make. There's a big difference between the traditional role of a small, diminutive, technical player who can turn on a half play it into the spaces. Gnonto can do that. Of course he can. He's a good player doing that. But the key requirements for the manager off the ball are something he has to work on. Now, there's one little part of this that is really important. And it's the ability to adapt. Of course, if you don't have the ideal tool as a manager, you need to adapt the role. You need to adapt how we play. You need to adapt the build-up. So if Gnonto plays in that role, he might have to adapt how he plays. Or the players around him might have to adapt their position. You know, what Norwich did really well was when so Stipperman, for example, would play alongside Pukki a lot. Then Buendia would sit into the 10, and the fullback would go up. Right? That's how they do it. That's how they adapted. Our problem is naturally, not always a winger, but naturally, his thinking, as mine would be as a winger, would be to drift out wide. Which is fine. But then you need to adapt the way you play to make sure you have that central threat. Otherwise, you've got 3 players out wide. It can work. Every formation, every player can work to an extent, but you've got to work on it. It's not ideal that the international break has arrived and you can't work on it. But when people say, and you look at random journalists who've not even watched Leeds United, who say he can play the 10, she doesn't play for Italy, by the way. Simple research shows you that. Plays as a second striker or as a winger, which are different roles. Different positions and different roles. Completely different to the way Leeds United play. It's not even completely comparable. Completely different ways to play. Like I said, the player for the system. Completely different. You cannot compare how anyone plays for the country, the way they play for the club. Completely different in every way. Different formation, different roles for the player, different instructions, different players around him. And the last kind of caveat is the question: can Gnonto do it? Yes, of course he can. The main reason being he's a good player. The kind of thing I've not took into account here is the level we're at and the quality of player he can be, right? If I'm playing, I'm not going to use me as an example. If you've got a Premier League player who's played at Premier League for 10 years and he goes and plays in the Eredivisie or something, there's a very strong chance you could play in that position and still be the best player in the league. Yeah. You know what I mean? Messi could go to the MLS and play as a number 8, as a midfielder, and he'd still probably be the best player in the league because he's better than the level. And I think on his day, Gnonto is better than the level. Right? He is. Of course, he could do that. But it's not on the ball that's the issue, for me personally. But the difference is, and the hardest part for me, is that off the ball stuff. It's understanding the role. It's not knowing what you need to do. It's being able to do it. So the press, Gnonto can press. Yeah, of course he can press. But it's understanding of the role. It's experience of the role. When is the trigger? Because a lot of the time, Pirro is not the trigger to press. Pirro cuts the pitch off. So the centre-back split, Pirro sit in the middle, and he'll cut one side off, and he'll force him down one side. This is where Aaronson triggers the press by going at the right time to the right man, and everyone else follows. It's understanding that trigger, when to go, when to drop deeper, who your man is. If your man's going over there, do I follow? Do I pass him on? These are the small details that need to be learnt. Farke's not going to tell Gnonto how to play in the final third, realistically. Because on his day, as we saw, Gnonto can tear anyone apart in the final third. Of course he can. He's an excellent footballer. It's allowing him or giving him time to learn the role, not just one part of it, because there's more than one part of it. Who do I mark at corners? Where am I placed? When the ball's in this part of the pitch, where am I? Where should I be? If we lose it here, should I be this high up? Because if not, I've got to go further back. Should I be deeper? There's so many different nuances in a role, and this is why it takes ages. But yeah, that's my thoughts on it. Let me know what you guys think. I know it's a long, talky one. But I think it's important to establish the differences. Because I know a lot of people are saying, and I've seen it, you said he can't play. I literally never said he can't play the 10. I said he's not an ideal fit for Daniel Farke in that role. We have to adjust the way we play, and he has to learn quick if he's going to play there. Right? And I'm coming from a recruitment perspective because that's all I know. And from a recruitment perspective, if you're looking for a Daniel Farke 10, and you've got your lists of players, your names, he's not on there, he isn't. One, because he's not played there, which means he's no experience of the role. He doesn't know what the role is. And two, well, because he isn't an ideal profile. That doesn't mean, just like Joe Perot showed, he's improved. Even Junior Firpo, improved. Bogle, improved. Rothwell. Doesn't mean he can't play the role, because he's a good player. And he's, as Farke said, and this is a really important thing, he's been training really well. Which means he wants to learn and he wants to understand. That's the key difference. Maybe he's a quick learner. Maybe we as a team can adjust around him so that role works and it doesn't take away our box threat. It doesn't take away the way we build up our fluidity. It doesn't fundamentally, the most important thing probably, take away how solid we are off the ball, because that's probably been our most consistent part of our season. How good we are, for the most part, out of possession. How good we are in possession, right? We're very good off it. Teams hardly get a chance against us, and that can't change. And that's the part I think this season that Daniel Farke is most worried about. A winger going into a central role because there's more to learn. It's not that he's a worse player or he can't do it. Footballers can do anything. They're very talented, especially when they're better than the level. There's more learning and more understanding. So that's the bit. But yeah. Hope you guys enjoy the video. We'll see. I'll see you guys in a bit. Thank you for all the support. As you're watching this, I will be going through the comments of the last video. You're all legends. I'll see you after the international break. Bye-bye.